In 1977, film history was made. Star Wars, later subtitled Episode 4, A New Hope, was a smash success, sparking an instant fandom and a massive multimedia empire. Currently, the fourth most profitable merchandise franchise in the world. So naturally, in the months that followed, talk abounded of whether or not auteur-director George Lucas would make another one. And another he made, with The Empire Strikes Back rolling into cinemas in 1980. And the initial reaction of both fans and the general public was divisive. While a lot of people liked it, and it made a fair amount of money, it wasn't nearly as successful as its predecessor, with many viewers disliking how it was more serious, the fact that Leia's into Han rather than Luke, that it ends on a cliffhanger, and just overall was too different from Star Wars. To those of you born after the 80s, this may come as a bit of a shock, as despite all the new movies and TV shows and books and video games and now theme parks in this franchise, the one near universal take that everyone shares is Empire is the best one. Personally, my favorite is Revenge of the Sith, but that's a separate series of video essays that will have to wait until after I'm done with Disney. When an author or filmmaker goes about making a sequel, there is a tension to be struck between how much you repeat what came before and how much you veer off in a new direction. For Star Wars fans in the 80s, and the 90s, and the aughts, and the 10s, and who the fuck are we kidding? Basically, always, the most vocal are going to be the ones demanding that nothing ever change and that Lucasfilm just keep churning out content that makes them feel like they're 10 years old in 1977 again. Which, let's be honest, is never going to happen no matter how many times they remake or reboot A New Hope. Sorry. But Star Wars was not the first piece of media to get a sequel. It's essentially impossible to pin down the very first sequel a human being created, but certainly some of the earliest examples, once again, are the fault of the ancient Greeks. Cycles of plays intended to be performed one after the other were relatively common, and the Odyssey picks up exactly where the Iliad left off. Mythology and folklore in general are more akin to what we'd now call a cinematic universe, with characters figuring in multiple stories, without those stories necessarily being sequels. Heracles has a cameo in Jason and the Argonauts, and the various gods and fantastical creatures were featured in many different tales. The same can be said for the Legendaria of King Arthur or Robin Hood or Reynard the Fox, but the word sequel was first used in English in the early 1500s, around the time when the modern novel was being developed. Someone would write a book, and then later write another one with the same characters, and, well, we needed a word to describe that, so we stole the Latin for it follows. By the time we get to 1977, sequels had been an established tradition in both literature and film, including cliffhangers. The 1001 Nights, which we'll be talking about in more detail in a couple videos, quite famously is a series of related stories ending in cliffhangers for the purpose of keeping the storyteller alive for another day. So why did Star Wars fans get so pissy? Well, first let's acknowledge that we can separate sequels into two more or less distinct groups, serials and sitcoms. Yes, I know sitcom refers to comedies, work with me here. A serial sequel picks up where the prior entry left off, continuing the story as if the two works form a combined narrative, cleft into two volumes. A sitcom sequel will use most of the same characters as its predecessor and may refer to some already established story elements, but otherwise has an independent narrative that does not require you to have read or watched the first one. The James Bond film series is a good example of sitcom sequels. They all have James Bond and M and Q and an Aston Martin and
shaken but stuffed.
But you don't have to watch them in any particular order. You could honestly roll a d25 to determine which one to watch if you've never seen one before. It just does not matter. Meanwhile, The Lord of the Rings is very serial. The Two Towers will not make any sense to you if you haven't first read or watched The Fellowship of the Ring. And indeed, Tolkien viewed the three stories as 3 volumes of one big book. Now, of course, this all exists on a spectrum. When writing a book or making a movie, you always have to contend with the fact that someone is going to pick up an entry from the middle of the series without reading the prior ones first. So each book or film or season of television does have to have its own enclosed narrative arc that is resolved by the end, even if it is a serial piece of media. This is why every Discworld book opens with an explanation of the elephants standing on a space turtle. And this can even apply to entries within one series. While The Lord of the Rings by itself is extremely serialized, you can read those books without first reading The Hobbit, which is itself a pretty isolated and self-contained story with a relatively minor plot element that ends up being the inciting incident for its sequel series. And in fact, Tolkien went back and edited The Hobbit to make that more clear. disappear and make the two works feel more cohesive and part of the same world. In the original version of Riddles in the Dark, Bilbo and Gollum say goodbye and part amicably. So no, George Lucas is not the first creator to go back and tinker with his earlier work. But this spectrum of seriality doesn't answer the fundamental question: what makes a good sequel? Does a sequel have to exist independently in order to be good, or should it build thematically and narratively on the work that came before? Are those rabid Star Wars fans correct in wanting more of the same, or are sequels better when they strive to be different? Or are there other qualities that determine how good a sequel is? To answer that question, let's rewind again to 1977, when film history was made. Okay, I jest, but The Rescuers was legitimately an important movie in animation history, keeping the Disney company afloat. I've said that for so many of these films, but it has to be kept in mind that until the 1990s, animation was almost never as profitable as live action. Disney animated features would make barely 2 or 3 times their budget, and that would be just enough to keep the lights on and finance the next one. From basically 1940 to 1990, if at any point Disney had had 2 animated flops in a row, it is highly likely that the animation department would have been shuttered entirely. And I would not be making this video series right now. Each flop led to serious budget cuts and more executive oversight in subsequent features, with budgets only increasing again when success was earned. So in the mid-80s, with Jeffrey Katzenberg and Michael Eisner trying to figure out what to do with their weird little company that they had just bought, they looked to one of Disney's rare unequivocal successes to make a sequel, only the second the company had ever made, if we're counting the Three Caballeros. As I've previously discussed, The Rescuers is inspired by a series of books by Marjorie Sharp, and if you'd like more detail on that, go watch the previous video I made. It's almost like this video's a sequel, see? What a natural tie-in. Anyway, while the studio could have gone back to Sharp's books and adapted one of the other storylines in them, they elected instead to tell a new story of their own. Once again, the audacity of "suggested by" in the credits. This makes The Rescuers Down Under essentially a piece of fan fiction. Now, fan fiction, despite how pissy Anne Rice got about it, is as old as literature itself. Authors have been writing sequels and AUs of their favorite works for thousands of years. Miguel de Cervantes got so irritated at an unauthorized fan sequel to Don Quixote that when he finally wrote a part 2, he killed off Quixote and ended the novel with a screed against any further fan fiction. For me alone was Don Quixote born, and I for him. It was his to act, mine to write. We two together make but one, notwithstanding and in spite of that pretended Tordesillas-esque writer who has ventured, or would venture with his great coarse, ill-trimmed ostrich quill to write the achievements of my valiant knight, no burden for his shoulders, nor subject for his frozen wit, whom, if perchance thou shouldst come to know him, thou shalt warn to leave at rest where they lie the weary, mouldering bones of Don Quixote, and not attempt to carry him off in opposition to all the privileges of death to old Castile, making him rise from the grave, where in reality and truth he lies stretched at full length, powerless to make any third expedition or new sally, for the 2 that he has already made, so much to the enjoyment and approval of everybody to whom they have become known, in this as well as in foreign countries, are quite sufficient for the purpose of turning into ridicule the whole of those made by the whole set of the knights errant. And so doing shalt thou discharge thy Christian calling, giving good counsel to one that bears ill will to thee. Paradise Lost and Dante's Inferno are fanfiction of the Bible, yet they are now considered to be classics of literature, and have become so fundamental to modern Christian mythology that a lot of Christians today believe things about heaven and hell that Milton and Dante made up and are not found anywhere in the older New Testament. Fanfiction is powerful, y'all. To head their new work of fanfiction, Katzenberg made a producer out of Thomas Schumacher, who said what might be either the dumbest or most brilliant thing I have ever heard.
We knew that Bernard and Bianca would come back in this movie because it's a film about them.
You know, I never thought about it that way, Tom. For directors, Katzenberg and Schumacher chose Mike Gabriel, who is still working at Disney and will come up a lot through the rest of this series, and Hendel Butoy, who left the company immediately after this movie and apparently doesn't even merit a Wikipedia page. Though according to IMDb, he's worked on a ton of non-Disney films, including Ferngully, Balto, Cats Don't Dance, The Iron Giant, and all of the Despicables Me. Now, why is it called Down Under? Well, Well, see, Crocodile Dundee made a boatload of money, so Jeffy Boy told Butoy and Gabriel to set their mouse sequel in Australia. Originally, they wanted the child in need of rescue to be Aboriginal, but Jeffrey did not like that and insisted they cast and animate a little blonde white kid. That kid, Adam Ryan, has done basically nothing else notable and also apparently does not merit a Wikipedia page. Of course, since the film's about them, they had to bring back Bob Newhart and Eva Gabor as Bernard and Bianca. This would be Gabor's final film, but as ever, the two of them are delightful together.
Well, nobody's home. Let's go.
This is no time to play in the snow.
Now, something you might be noticing from these clips is there is not a single black line in sight. That's because every single frame of this movie was made inside a computer. Granted, the drawings of the animators were still done on paper, but those were then scanned into a computer rather than xerographed directly onto celluloid. Those scanned drawings, as well as the painted backgrounds, were then assembled together inside a program called CAPS, an acronym for Computer Animation and Production System. With CAPS, the animation department was no longer limited by the colors they could physically mix into paints. Here, they could color their lines and fills with any hue the human eye can see, using computer hex code rather than chemical pigments. Remember how for The Little Mermaid there were like 3 multiplane camera shots and Disney had to farm those out to other studios? In The Rescuers Down Under, almost every single shot has a multiplane element to it. Because it's being done in a computer program, they could just tell CAPS which scene element should hold the focus, and then an algorithm would blur whatever's in front of or behind it. Multiplane shots could now be achieved with the click of a mouse rather than a massive mechanism. And once a frame was complete, it was displayed on a ridiculously high-resolution monitor and directly photographed onto film. At no point was anything physically painted onto celluloid. There are no physical copies of any frame of this film, nor any animated film Disney made after this, because no physical cells were ever made. Now, I've brought up CGI in the last few videos, but this process was new. The gears of Big Ben and the Great Mouse Detective had their wireframes coded inside a program which then was able to determine how they should move from frame to frame, but each frame was then printed out onto paper and xerographed onto celluloid where it could be hand-painted. By contrast, this technique of rendering inside a computer and then photographing a high-resolution display had been used previously for pure CGI elements such as in Tron or The Abyss, but this was the first time it was used for traditional animation. And it was a game changer. It cannot be stressed enough how much CAPS is responsible for the success of the Disney Renaissance, as much or even more so than the Broadway sensibilities of Alan Menken and Howard Ashman, the energy of the new generation of animators and storytellers, or the ruthlessness of Jeffrey Katzenberg. Because of CAPS, for the first time in decades, Disney animation looked good. Now, of course, as with any technological revolution, this came with downsides. Xerography was no longer required, nor was the ink and paint shop that Disney had become famous for, and all of the employees responsible for those parts of production either had to find new roles in the new system or were let go. However, not having to pay for the ink and paint shop meant that that portion of a film's budget could be allocated elsewhere, such as for more intricate shots, more detailed animation, or as we shall soon see, more famous voice talent. But for now, CAPS simply meant more dynamic animation and a wider color palette. The system had been tested very briefly in The Little Mermaid for the very last scene. Look at all the little sparklies! Xerography could not have done that many colors. That was made inside a computer. The Rescuers Down Under begins almost exactly like its predecessor with a brief cold open leading into the opening credits. The difference is, with CAPS,
I make this look good.
we soar across the Outback on the thermals of Bruce Broughton's score. Bruce is a pretty prolific composer, writing everything from the Jag title theme to the score for Harry and the Hendersons to the music that plays in Epcot's Spaceship Earth, and he's still working. One of his latest efforts was the title theme of The Orville, of all things. As the credits end, the camera zooms into the bedroom of our soon-to-be trafficked child of the evening, Cody. He hears the call of a didgeridoo in the distance and off he goes.
We'll be out for supper. No worries, Mom.
As a child of the 90s, I can confirm this is exactly how I grew up. Any day I wasn't in school, I would be told to go outside and play, and I would wander the neighborhood or the surrounding woods until it got dark and was time for dinner. And honestly, there was nothing wrong with that. Let kids go out and explore. It's good for them. What was I talking about? Right, Cody meets up with the player of the didgeridoo, a kangaroo, who summoned the kid with the Australian version of the bat signal because it turns out Cody routinely helps to rescue animals. So, first off, I like that this is an inversion of the previous film. In the original The Rescuers, animals have to rescue a child, and in this movie, it is a child who rescues animals, at least to start. Secondly, this makes Rescuers Down Under part of a larger trend in the early 90s of children's media with a heavy environmental focus. This is in the wake of big cleanup projects in New York and Lake Erie, as well as greater awareness of deforestation in the Amazon, and also learning that aerosols were burning a hole in the ozone layer. So we got films like Fern Gully and Pocahontas and Once Upon a Forest, not to mention shows like Captain Planet to teach kids to plant trees and punch polluters. What is notable about this 90s environmentalist movement is it did not touch upon global warming in any fashion. We're gonna have to wait a decade for that to enter the public consciousness, and we will discuss it in more detail in a later video. We watched Cody hurry through the Outback, and already we are seeing so much multiplane animation. Since Caps made multiplane shots easy, almost every shot in this film has multiplane elements to it, and it gives the entire movie a depth and scale that in prior canon entries was restricted to specific key moments. We feel the sheer height as Cody scales the cliff, at the top of which we find Marahute, the great golden eagle. Now, golden eagles are big, but they ain't this big. Real ones max out with a wingspan a little under 8 feet, but none of that matters because Marahute is gorgeous. Who did they get to animate the big bird? Glenn Keane, of course. Had he ever animated a bird before? Nope. Did that matter? Nope. Watch the master at work. Cody frees the great bird, but is accidentally knocked off the cliff. The score, the multiplane shots, the rushing wind, Cody's face, all of it works together to sell the suspense of this kid hurtling toward bus stop gravity. And just before he's flattened into Vegemite, Marahute swoops under him and the two fly off into the clouds. Eat your fucking heart out, How to Train Your Dragon. No one, and I mean no one, not DreamWorks, not The Neverending Story, not Don Bluth, not even James fucking Cameron has ever done a flying scene as good as this. It is absolutely the highlight of the film. Also, hold up, rewind. I can't tell if it's exactly the same with all the other noise from the film, but it sounds awfully similar. And The Rescuers Down Under does predate the game Messiah. Maybe H-Bomber Guy needs to revisit this deep dive. At any rate, where The Rescuers was about a greedy lady looking for pirate treasure, the villain of Down Under is Percival C. McLeach, a poacher. While his visual design isn't particularly extravagant compared to other Disney villains, this character rides off the vocal performance provided by George C. Scott.
I read your book!
As well as his fantastic facial expressions provided by Duncan Marjoribanks, who was also the supervising animator for Sebastian. After his joyride on Marahute, Cody gets caught in a trap, and who shows up but McLeach in his big scary truck with his lizard Joanna. Everyone say hello to Frank Welker, man of a literal 1,000 voices. He has voiced basically everyone. Just go look up his filmography on Wikipedia if you ever have an hour to kill.
Dumb lizards always trying to bury squirrels out here.
McLeach is at first willing to just look the other way and let Cody go, but the kid decides to start screaming about how poaching's legal, and then Percy notices the golden feather stuck in his backpack.
You see, I already got the father.
Cody may be stupid, but he sure is brave and exhibits both of those qualities by confidently asserting that the Rangers will find him.
Oh no, not the Rangers, what'll I do? Don't let your ma call the Rangers!
McLeach does not give two shits about the Australian Mounties, tosses Cody in his demon truck, and clatters off into the wilderness. Lucky for Cody, there was a mouse in the poacher trap, which he rescued to show the audience how nice he is, and that mouse starts a relay signal all the way to New York, and if this movie were more well-known, this scene would be a meme by now. Also, is it just me, or is the rescue theme in this movie similar to the finale of Beethoven's Fifth? I do like how Broughton made different motifs. There's one for the Outback, one for McLeach, one for Marahute, the rescue motif, and there's another one for Bernard and Bianca. we'll get to them in a bit. First, we have to zoom into the UN building, which is made of digital now. We get a brief callback to the RAS theme song from the original, before the flustered chair mouse calls for the famed Bernard and Miss Bianca to rescue Cody. But what's this? They're not here! Where could they be? Why, having a romantic dinner in a fancy restaurant, of course.
Oh, peace up.
Now, this is where the fanfiction really starts to come in. In Marjorie Sharp's books, Bernard and Bianca are purely platonic co-workers. They do not fall in love, they do not start a family, they are just friends. The writers at Disney, channeling every queer person on Tumblr, said, fuck that, we want the mice to be in love. So the main B-plot of this movie is Bernard awkwardly trying to propose while he keeps misplacing the ring.
Would you excuse me for a minute?
I love that the two of them go to this fancy restaurant so often they are on first-name terms with the maitre d'.
Not now, Francois. I'm busy.
They get some brief shenanigans when Bernard crawls around trying to get the ring before the two of them get recalled for their mission and they will be packing light.
Just a pair of khaki shorts and some hiking boots.
Bianca will not be seen wearing either of those in this movie, sorry to disappoint. Now sadly, the voice actor for Orville the Albatross, Jim Jordan, died in 1988. So Disney decided to pay homage to him by having Orville retire and hand the business over to his brother Wilbur. Yes, they are named after the Wright brothers. Ha, ha. And Wilbur is voiced by John Candy.
May I just say enchanté, señorita, to you?
Best casting decision Disney ever made, and honestly my favorite film that John Candy is in. If I could make this video entirely quotes of his, I would.
Guava nectar, it's carbonated, very nice. I got little umbrellas for each one of them and a little coconut thing.
Of course, Bob Newhart gets in nearly as many good ones.
Miss Bianca, I'm not sure it's such a good idea to fly this soon after eating.
Wilbur is at first reticent to fly into a raging blizzard, but is convinced by hearing about Cody's predicament.
Kids should be free. Free to run wild through the house on Saturday mornings, free to have cookies and milk, and get those little white mustaches.
And after a little light exercise...
Oh, okay, one's enough. There we go.
Off they go! So while Caps made it so much easier to composite hand-drawn and painted assets into frames, purely digital CGI creations were still a little rough around the edges, which is probably why Wilbur flies through Manhattan at night in a snowstorm, so you don't see how Nintendo 64 all the skyscrapers look. The Sydney Opera House we'll see in a few suffers rather a bit more for being in broad daylight and is probably the special effect that has aged the worst in this movie.
Nothing but abandoned opal mines as far as the eye can see.
Right, kidnapped kid to check in on. Have I mentioned yet this movie is the second one in the canon to have no musical numbers?
Home on the range, where the critters are tied up in chains.
Okay, that's diegetic, that doesn't count. That's basically the same as Fluter singing something in the Black Cauldron. But you can tell George C. Scott had a blast voicing McLeach, and we're having just as much fun listening to him. Back to the mice. We see Bianca waking up first to give Bernard a cute little kiss on the cheek because of course she loves him back. Bernard spends this whole movie anxious about whether or not she'll accept the proposal, while Bianca views the whole thing as basically a done deal. It is adorable. What's less adorable is Wilbur almost crushing them when he rolls over in his sleep, but once he's awake, off they go. Of course, Bernard is less amused.
From now on, can't we just take the train?
We then meet our final ostensible main character in Jake, the kangaroo rat.
Wise fly.
He is mostly there to serve as a jealousy target for Bernard and make smolders at Bianca, who is flattered but not so easily swayed from her beloved Chungus.
He makes me laugh.
Oh, and I suppose he's also furry bait. At least one of my Patreon patrons admitted to having a crush on him. Anyway, as we all know by now, albatrosses can't land for shit, but that's not stopping Wilbur. I love that the checkerboard doubles as a field guide to birds. Glorious piece of world building there.
Crazy yank.
We get some comedy from Jake making a landing platform for Wilbur.
Hold this for me, will you, pal?
And Jake is ready to cuss them all out before he sees the ravishing Miss Bianca and becomes our third wheel for the evening. Though as previously stated, not particularly convincing, we all know whom Bianca really likes. This is where we start the C-plot of this film, torturing John Candy.
Oh, take the bags.
Since Bernard and Bianca apparently keep Acme anvils in their luggage, Wilbur hurts his back and is left at a field hospital where he is treated with the utmost care.
I've been skewered.
Of course, he doesn't want to take his medicine, so they have to sedate him with a gun.
60 milligrams.
That's the voice actor for Minnie Mouse, by the way, Russie Taylor. This was one of my favorite scenes as a kid because it's just so out of pocket.
Snap to it. Ooh, that's smart.
We will check in on our albatross later. In the meantime, Jake is guiding the Americans through the hostile Outback.
Suicide Trail through Nightmare Canyon or the shortcut at Satan's Ridge?
Suicide Trail?
Good choice.
I've never been to Australia, but everything I've ever read about it leads me to believe this is a completely accurate stereotype. Aussies, please correct me in the comments if it's not.
Doesn't even know how to fold a map.
Honestly, I could have made the thesis question for this video be about manhood or toxic masculinity or something along those lines. Here we have two competing styles of manhood. In Bernard, we have the awkward, soft-spoken yet supportive type, who is honestly just as interested in being an actual friend to his romantic partner as he is in maybe potentially fucking her. In contrast, we have Jake, the stereotypical, rugged, manly man, modeled very clearly off of Crocodile Dundee. Physically strong and dexterous, able to handle wild animals and orienteer across the wilderness, and also very clearly solely interested in the possibility of sex.
We're coming in for a landing.
Jake sees Bianca as a possible conquest. Bernard sees her as a possible life partner. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that Bianca ends up with Bernard in the end. There's no other way this could go down. Bianca is entertained by Jake, which is fuel for Bernard's jealousy, but that's just who Bianca is. She's friendly, sometimes flirtatious, but also genuinely kind and open-minded and curious and eager to help at every occasion. But Bernard is so filled with anxiety over whether or not he's sufficiently filling the societal role of man that he feels unmanned by Jake.
We got a long way to go, and you're gonna take us there.
Bernard's entire arc in this movie is superficially to become more stereotypically manly, to become more like Jake, but not in every respect. What makes Jake appealing is his confidence, and it is that confidence that Bernard needs to find. But let's remember what this movie is about, which is rescuing an abducted kid. This film sometimes seems to forget that, as the B and C plots have basically nothing to do with the rescue. Having to free Cody seems almost like background noise to Bernard for most of the movie, as his main focus is proposing to Bianca. Is that selfish? Well, to Bernard, this is just another job. He and Bianca have been ostensibly rescuing kids for a while now, presumably there have been a few others since Penny, and when you've been doing something for so long, even something so life-risking and important, it becomes just another job. Bernard thinking about Bianca doesn't mean he isn't thinking about Cody, but the rescue for him is kind of on autopilot. Speaking of Cody, McLeach has been trying to get him to blab about where Marahute is, but the kid is righteously stubborn, so the poacher throws him in a cage. It is here we meet the D-plot, McLeach's back market menagerie. So the animators went on a research trip to Australia, a practice that would be repeated for the rest of the Renaissance. They observed Australian animals so they could animate them accurately. That's why the animals in this movie look so good. The animators actually did their research. One of those animals is Frank the Frilled Lizard, who is animated by Kathy Zielinski, who I believe is the first female supervising animator on a Disney film. She also apparently animated Frog Fluter bouncing on witch tits in the Black Cauldron, which is probably why that scene works so well. Along with Frank, there's a kangaroo, a kookaburra, and the gayest koala ever set to film.
You'll go as a wallet, you'll go as a belt.
Of course, Frank does not like this prospect.
No! Oh, a lovely lady's purse.
I don't want to go as a purse.
So Cody leads the animals in an escape effort, tying planks together to reach the keys. Of course, just as they get the keys, Joanna shows up and shits all over their hopes and dreams.
I feel like I got my head in a vice.
Right, the C-plot! This movie might be juggling one too many plates. The Dr. Mouse has concluded that surgery is required.
Bring me the epidermal tissue disruptor.
The epidermal what? No!
Turns out a good scare and landing on a doctor was all Wilbur needed.
Hey! Oh! It works! I'm cured! My back!
And off he flaps to try and reconvene with the B-plot, because turns out that field hospital was right next to Cody's house, and we watch the despair in his mom's body language as a ranger hands her what's left of his backpack. It is with the radio announcing the end of the search for Cody that we fade to McLeach.
I'm hungry. Can't think on an empty stomach. Gotta have protein.
This movie is just filled with moments of comedic brilliance, and one of those is Joanna slowly stealing every single one of McLeach's eggs.
My mental facilities are twice what yours are, you pea-brain.
Turns out having an empty stomach actually makes McLeach think better as he realizes how he can get Cody to lead him to Marahute.
Eagle's eggs.
Which brings us back to the D plot as Frank somehow picks the lock of the cage with his tail. This gives us more shenanigans with Frank versus Joanna for the keys, including a now very familiar looking floating animation. But we've still got a solid 20 minutes until the credits roll, so we can't have nice things yet, and McLeach gets Frank back in his cage as he drags Cody away.
Say goodbye to your little friends. It's the last you'll ever see of them.
Correct! We do not! The D-plot is abandoned here and is never resolved. We must simply imagine that Frank and the rest get freed after McLeach is dealt with.
I didn't make it all the way through 3rd grade for nothing.
God, George C. Scott is having so much pleasure in this movie. His plan is to let Cody loose, telling him Marahute is dead, knowing the kid will go back to save the eggs. The one flaw I can see with this scheme is that McLeach is following in his demon truck, and how the hell does Cody not notice it? Whatever, this movie is just so full of gorgeous multi-plane shots, I have to forgive it. Some movies just have a natural sense of scale. Gareth Edwards is the director that comes to mind to me for this, with Godzilla and Rogue One just effortlessly showcasing just how massive those monsters and space weapons are. With The Rescuers Down Under, you are constantly aware of the grandness and majesty of the Australian landscape.
Just look at her. Look at the size of her.
Oh, and the animals too, of course. McLeach snags his prize and is seeing Australian dollar signs.
Does she want to make sure that bird stays rare?
Okay, that means you'll be out of a living though, you know that, right? Wait, why the hell am I trying to teach a poacher from 35 years ago how to run a sustainable business? McLeach yeets Joanna off the cliff to gobble the eagle eggs, but thankfully, Bernard has arrived on the scene and swapped the real eggs out for rocks, which is a wonderful demonstration of his quick thinking and cleverness. But it also means he's stuck there as McLeach drives off with the bird, the kid, and the other 2 rodents. Hey look, the C plot! Bernard convinces Wilbur to incubate the eggs.
Gotta learn to be more assertive.
And he will be sat on that nest for the rest of the movie. Sorry, John Candy.
Hey, quit moving in there.
Alright, almost done.
We got a loose end to tie up.
The climax of this film is at Crocodile Falls, where McLeach originally tossed in Cody's backpack. Hope seems lost, but Bianca still has faith in her chungus.
You don't know Bernard like I do.
Of course, trying to follow a truck on foot is already hard for a human, and for a mouse it's basically impossible. So Bernard has to finally grow a pair and do like Jake do.
I've got a long way to go. You're gonna take me there, and you're not gonna give me any trouble about it, right?
Meanwhile, we return to McLeach's plot by panning over Chekhov's waterfall. Gee, I wonder why it's called that.
Oh, you get a line, I'll get a pole, matey.
George, you're my favorite. But you're still the villain, and Bernard returns triumphant to fuck up his plans.
Did you know there was a razorback in my truck?
Even without power, McLeach is determined to off this child by shooting the rope with his gun, and while Bianca and Jake relay the keys to unlock Marahute's cage, Bernard tricks Joanna into charging at her master.
Yeah, what?
Okay, make that the 3rd time our hero deliberately causes the death of the villain. Let's put you up there with Princess Philip and Eric, buddy. McLeach manages to fend off the gators, but doesn't make it to shore, and Joanna waving goodbye is another clip I have saved as a GIF. So that's why it's called Chekhov's waterfall. Now the villain might be dealt with, but we're not done yet. McLeach's demise shows us the threat to Cody as he is rapidly pulled by the current toward the edge. This is another moment of intense suspense. The score, the quick cuts, the multi-plane shots, and as Marahute dives down after Cody, we hold our breaths until... Our heroes soar through the night sky, and they all thank a wet and bedraggled Bernard.
Well done, mate.
Congratulations! Congratulations!
Of course, Bernard is reunited with Bianca, and he has one mission.
Before anything else happens, will you marry me?
She eagerly accepts, and we fly off into the full moon. Oh, wait, what's that? You want to know what happened to John Candy?
Stay in those eggs. That's a direct order.
Let the credits roll. The Rescuers Down Under made about the same box office that its predecessor did, but because of inflation, that meant that it was actually a box office bomb. Katzenberg pulled advertising after the first week in theaters, just like for The Black Cauldron. The film was never even given a chance. And who caused all that inflation? Well, while a significant chunk can be blamed on the Iranian oil crisis under Jimmy Carter's tenure, Carter reduced unemployment and made a lot of decisions that didn't end up paying off until after he was out of office. And who followed him up? Why, Ronald Reagan, of course. Fans of Reagan will declare that the Gipper got inflation under control, and while the inflation rate did stabilize, it leveled out at a rate about twice as high as it was before Nixon resigned. All of this together meant that $1 in 1990 had less than half the buying power of $1 in 1977. We'll talk more about Ronnie in the next video, don't worry. The Rescuers Down Under is definitely not a perfect movie. It's got a few too many things going on, a bit of a tonal whiplash problem, and some plot elements are just never resolved. But it is also one of the most visually arresting entries in the entire canon, a rip-roaring action-adventure, and overall just very fun, as well as funny. As a film, it is much better than the original The Rescuers, and I would definitely recommend it over the 1977 movie any day of the week. But is it a good sequel? Down Under definitely fits more in the category of sitcom sequel. You definitely don't need to have watched the first one to enjoy it, and as a kid I actually watched Down Under first. That's the one we had on VHS. But while I think it's a better movie, I don't think I could honestly say that it's a good sequel. The quality of a sequel qua sequel doesn't really come down to how serialized it is or how much fan service it provides. A sequel should elevate the prior entry. It should make you want to watch the prior entry, to view them as a series as a whole. And The Rescuers Down Under doesn't really do that. Whenever I'm watching The Rescuers, I'm just thinking about how much better the other one is. It's pretty telling that throughout this entire review, I think I talked about how but a single scene in Down Under connected back to the first one. Whereas The Empire Strikes Back builds upon A New Hope. You want to watch both of them in succession to get the full experience of the story. And honestly, this applies to the prequels as well. Just watching the original trilogy, Return of the Jedi is clearly the odd one out, more kid-friendly, more focused on action and explosions, with a pretty neatly gift-wrapped happy ending. But after watching the prequels, and especially Revenge of the Sith, with the additional depth to Darth Vader as a character, not just as a villainous obstacle, Return of the Jedi is elevated, making it feel like a cohesive part of a 6-chapter story and a now more satisfying ending. And that's what sequels should strive to do. They can't just be good in their own right, they have to add dimension and nuance to the other entries. A good sequel can't just follow. It has to look back, to circle back, really, as watching one entry should make you want to watch the other entry, and on and on. But of course, I can't finish a video talking about sequels without addressing the flying elephant that is the direct-to-video trash sequels. These are a mixed bag, and all of them have pretty trash animation. Personally, I'm fond of the Aladdin sequels, though that might just be the nostalgia talking. And Cinderella 3 is batshit crazy, but the rest of them are mostly just cringe garbage that was farted out at the end of Michael Eisner's tenure to suck up as much money as possible.
He's obnoxious and disliked. Did you know that? I hadn't heard.
And we are seeing the exact same thing happen with these live-action remakes, except those are ridiculously expensive instead of dirt cheap somehow. The trash sequels tried to trick parents and kids into thinking there was more story to tell, when most of the time there was not. The remakes prey on nostalgia to make you watch an inferior version of a story you've already seen. Neither of them elevate their predecessors. The former tarnish the originals with their awfulness, while the latter are trying to replace the originals by quote-unquote fixing them and giving them an uncanny veneer of CGI polish. And that's not even talking about the later canon sequels, which are also a mixed bag, but we will address them in due time. For now, I'm going to congratulate myself for getting through one of these videos without once mentioning Trump. God damn it! As ever, I am grateful to my Patreon patrons, including but not limited to Gurgi85, Jinx KB, Savannah Mighty Zebra, Tony Houst, Bewilder Eye, Jekko, Sugar Cubed Glider, Lord Christine, Andrew T, Agent Shifter, Husky Trent, Lemon Lamb Laura, Aspadites, That Gay Duck, Sugar Snap Kaylee, Pandora the Omnipresent, Gil the Gilded Dragon, and The Art Gremlin. This content is sponsored by viewers like you. It's only $5 a month, or 10 if you want me to say your name at the end here. I've also announced some patron stretch goals at which I will make some fun music videos. Either way, join me next time as we take a look at the AIDS crisis with Beauty and the Beast.